It's a real pleasure. So I'm happy to report to all of you that we had a very productive and constructive G7 meeting 50 years after its creation. So it's a real pleasure to be with you today. So bonjour tout le monde. Thank you all for being here for the press conference. The governor and I, the governor of the Bank of Canada, have been delighted to welcome everyone to the Canadian Rockies here in Banff, Alberta. And it was a very successful G7. This year, our focus was to return the G7 core mission, restoring global growth and stability. As the host country, Canada had both the privilege and also, I would say, the responsibility of shaping the economic agenda for this landmark 50th G7 meeting. Au cours des 3 derniers jours, nous avons travaillé ensemble pour élaborer des politiques visant à créer des emplois de qualité, stimuler la croissance économique et renforcer notre coopération face aux défis économiques mondiaux les plus urgents. Le G7 s'appuie sur des valeurs communes fondamentales telles que la démocratie, le respect des droits de l'homme et l'économie de marché. My colleagues and I reached agreement on a communique which you will all have seen, which emphasized, above all, the importance of G7 unity in the face of complex global challenges. The agreement on a joint communique at this important point in time demonstrates our shared resolve to work together at this crucial point in history. During this week's meeting, we had productive and frank discussions, very constructive, very engaging discussion on the global economy, on global imbalances, on non-market policies and practices which have led to overcapacity, combating financial crime, and artificial intelligence. So as you can see, we had a broad-based agenda, and we found common grounds. This is what the G7 is about. You have the largest economy in the world, and we found common ground on the most pressing global issues that we face. We also discussed the situation in Ukraine, during which Minister Marchenko participated. And I want to say on behalf of all our G7 partners, both the ministers and the governors, that I want to sincerely thank him for his presence here in Banff, in Alberta, in Canada. En tant que président de ce G7, il était crucial pour moi d'avoir des rencontres bilatérales avec chacun de mes homologues, ainsi qu'avec la directrice générale du FMI. Et ce soir, j'aurai le privilège de pouvoir dîner avec le président de la Banque mondiale à Calgary ce soir. Ces échanges ont été essentiels pour forger un consensus solide qui se concrétise aujourd'hui par l'accord que nous avons le plaisir de vous présenter. Canada came to this 50th meeting with a clear priorities, fostering growth and restoring stability to the global economy. And I'm proud that these goals are reflected in our shared efforts and in the communique. Ministers and governors agree on a number of things. Let me mention a few of them. A financial crime call to action to tackle financial crime, including money laundering and terrorist financing, as part of our steadfast commitment to this effort to combat financial crimes around the world. Canada will also contribute $4.8 million in new technical assistance to developing economies so they can assist in combating financial crime. We're also going to address risk stemming from the large increase in low-value shipments that have been imported into G7 markets. We're also going to advance work on supply chain resiliency. That is something which is very important and critical for each of our economy. And finally, we have reiterated our support for Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion, including to ramping up sanctions if necessary, and to support efforts to foster private sector participation in the recovery and in the reconstruction of Ukraine. We also agree that no one who supported the Russian war machine will benefit from reconstruction efforts in Ukraine. Alors, je tiens à remercier chaleureusement mes homologues pour cette réunion à la fois productive et constructive, ainsi que pour avoir réaffirmé notre engagement commun envers le G7 et pour avoir permis l'adoption unanime d'une déclaration finale. Ensemble, continuons à unir nos forces pour relever les défis mondiaux, stimuler une croissance solide et durable et transformer nos ambitions communes en résultats concrets I want to thank you all. I want to thank all the G7 colleagues who have come here to Banff in Alberta. I think as much as the G7 started in Fontainebleau in France in 1975, that everyone will remember, I think that the Banff G7 Summit will be remembered in 2025 as a turning point between the G7 members. We are united. We had constructive, productive, and informative discussion, which has led to a communique and a renewed sense of action that we're going to take collectively and that we're going to work from now to our next meeting. And I would say I want to thank also my co-chair, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, which has done a great job in really preparing and co-chairing this meeting. So, Governor, with that, I just want to say thank you for all the work you've done on behalf of all Canadians. Governor.
Well, it was a pleasure, and Minister Champagne, I think I speak for both of us when I say what a pleasure it was to host our G7 colleagues here in beautiful Banff, Alberta. In our sessions yesterday, we did identify at least 4 areas where the G7 can provide clear leadership, and those are reflected in the communique. Reducing policy uncertainty, addressing unsustainable global imbalances, improving the dialogue around tariffs and fixing the problems in the global trading system, and implementing policies to boost productivity and growth. Today, we also had important discussions on fostering the adoption of AI, equipping workers in our countries, and harnessing the productivity gains from AI. Over the last 2 days, we also discussed reducing risks in our financial system, and we agreed on improving data collection and sharing of information on non-bank financial institutions. I want to particularly highlight the tone of the discussions was particularly constructive. Maybe we were helped by the breathtaking views of the Canadian Rockies and the wonderful fresh mountain air, but whatever it was, there was a real spirit of constructive engagement, a spirit of working together to the benefit of our citizens. And I am gratified that many of my colleagues remarked that throughout our G7 presidency, the tone of the discussions has become progressively more constructive. As the Minister just highlighted, this is a pivotal moment for the global economy. And what I can say is we met the moment with candor and with clear focus on improving the economic and financial welfare of our citizens and the shared benefit of working together. Les réunions de cette semaine et le communiqué d'aujourd'hui nous placeront sur une base solide avant le sommet des dirigeants qui se tiendra le mois prochain à Kananaskis. Notre conviction commune de la valeur du G7 est ce qui nous permet de partager les mêmes idées. Et c'est le cas depuis 50 ans. This week's meeting and today's joint communique will put us on a solid foundation ahead of the Leaders' Summit next month in Kananaskis. Our shared belief in the value of the G7 is what keeps us like-minded. And as the Minister just highlighted, it has for 50 years. And with that, two of us will be pleased to take your questions.
Merci tout le monde.
Nous allons maintenant commencer la période de questions. Donc, une question, un suivi. Ça va être à peu près une vingtaine de minutes. Dites votre nom et votre média. We will not start the question period. Please state your name, your media. It will be about 20 minutes. One question will follow up. Go ahead.
Oh, we're at the mic here.
In the mic.
Yes.
There.
I think you need
Sorry.
to go to the mic. That's the Canadian way,
Sorry.
but...
Bonjour, hello, Karina Roman, CBC News. You have said repeatedly that the goal, really overarching goal, is to restore financial stability to the globe as a whole. Now that you've had 2 days at the table with your G7 counterparts, how much of an uphill battle will that be when the biggest player at the table, the U.S., is the cause of so much of that instability, and their policies don't seem to be changing anytime soon?
Well, I would say, well, first of all, thank you for your question. As the governor and I said, we had very constructive and productive discussion. We understand that we need to reduce uncertainty in order to increase growth. I think, we went back to basics. For me, this G7 is back to basic, back to the core mission. Our mission, my mission when I entered the room, was really to promote stability and growth. And I would say of all the international meetings I've attended, this was one where you had frank discussion, that people shared views on different issues, but also there was a strong call to actions. We found common ground on a number of things. If you look at the communique, a lot of people were wondering even at the time whether there would be a communique. And now what you have is that the best proof of unity is that we have a joint communique. So we are resolved in our commitment to work together, as the governor said, and there will be more work. This is like we have a work plan ahead of us, a number of actions you've seen in the communique that we're going to tackle together. I can think about supply chain resiliency. I can think about tackling financial crime. I can think also about the menu of growth enhancing policies that we have put on the table that we have discussed with international organizations. So we have achieved, I would say, when I look at where we are to where we are today and the journey ahead of us, we're on a good track in order to reduce the instability and uncertainty that we have seen.
On a different tack,
Yes.
In the wake of the Washington shootings, Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu says, being part of the joint statement with the UK and France on Gaza, that Canada's Prime Minister in Canada has essentially said that it wants Hamas to remain in power, that it's emboldening Hamas, this statement that we are part of, and that Canada is on the wrong side of history. What do you say in response to that?
Well, I would leave that to the Prime Minister. I have, the governor and I have been very focused, as you would expect, on these G7 meetings. They are very important. We're shaping the global agenda. I have seen the comments, but that will leave the Prime Minister to comment on behalf of the Government of Canada.
Next question.
Hi, Rachel Aiello, CTV News.
Yes, it's great to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Minister. Were Trump's tariffs as much an elephant in the room as it seems, or were they addressed head-on?
Well, there's always discussions about how we can do better amongst the G7 members, because obviously we have big things to tackle, and there's always discussion about how we can have more freedom, I would say, of goods between and trade between our countries. So there's no doubt that there's discussion around that policy of tariff by the United States. But I would say there's also a very constructive discussion about what's the way forward that we can adopt and where can we find common ground to tackle other global challenges, like we've seen overcapacity, non-market practices, which are affecting our respective economies. So I would say constructive discussion, and obviously you would expect in these meetings, that's the essence of the G7. It's a forum for discussion, a forum for action. So people put issues on the table that they have, but at the same time, we are united in our resolve to restore as much as we can stability and also have more growth amongst the G7 economies in the world. Ben, écoutez, on a abordé beaucoup de choses durant ces réunions-là. C'est normal durant ces réunions-là qu'on ait des discussions franches, des discussions constructives. La question des tarifs revient dans ces discussions-là, mais aussi, il faut mettre ça dans le contexte où les collègues sont prêts à regarder différentes mesures qu'on peut prendre ensemble pour augmenter, j'allais dire, pour ramener plus de stabilité, pour ramener plus de croissance. Il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on peut faire ensemble comme pays du G7, et je pense que le communiqué donne un bon exemple de toutes les mesures sur lesquelles on a pu s'entendre en disant, en travaillant là-dessus, on sera en mesure j'allais dire, de promouvoir la stabilité, mais en même temps la croissance qu'on a besoin de voir dans les différentes économies.
And you've called the war in Russia's war in Ukraine, illegal, but the communique doesn't include that strong of language. I'm just wondering, did the wording of the communique have to be watered down to appease Bessent?
No, I would say no. Obviously, I think you have seen that the G7 stands shoulder to shoulder with our Ukrainian colleagues. We had Minister Marchenko with us, Tiff and I. He was warmly welcome. We had a discussion about whatever additional sanctions that may need to be taken in order to hold Russia to account. And at the same time, you have seen that we have put in the communique something that was reflected also by Secretary Bessent back in Washington, that no one and no entities who somehow supported the Russian war machine should benefit directly or indirectly from the reconstruction that we'll have in Ukraine. And as you know, this is going to be a huge effort. There's a moral imperative to support Ukraine during the war, but also during the reconstruction. But at the same time, we're talking about something close to $524 billion over a decade. So this is going to be an immense endeavor, and that's why earlier this week, I sat down also with Canadian pension funds and Canadian entities to see what's the role that Canada can play in these very important reconstruction effort in Ukraine.
Next question.
Paul Vieira from the Wall Street Journal. I have one
How are you doing, sir?
Very well. I have
Good
one
to see you.
question for Mr. Champagne and one question for the governor. Mr. Champagne, what specific demands did the Treasury Secretary make with you in your bilateral and with the other G7 members before any sort of tariff relief from Washington can unfold?
Well, listen, I won't go into the specific of our discussion. We get along well. That's what I can tell you. I was delighted that Secretary Bessent came for the entirety of the G7 meeting. We had discussion on a number of issues. I can tell you the Secretary's contribution was welcomed by all the G7 colleagues, in particular when we talk also about supply chain resiliency. So there's a number of topics that we have brought, and I'm glad that we had the chance to be together. We'll be together again, and we get along very well together. So this was one discussion, and there'll be more discussion about a whole range of issues, and you would understand why. Because Canada is the biggest customer in the United States. I always say we buy more from the United States than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. So it's quite normal when you meet your biggest customer that there's a lot to discuss. You know, we're the most integrated economy. We are the largest customer to the United States. So we always have a lot of things to discuss, and also how do we shape the global agenda together.
Governor, if monetary policy isn't well suited to handle a stagflationary tariff shock, is it wise for you and your counterparts to be punting to fiscal policy, given increased demands for military spending, the downgrade to U.S. debt, and the recent run-up in longer-term bond yields?
Well, we got the Minister of Finance here to talk about fiscal policy. You don't need me. Let me just say a couple of comments about the dialogue around tariffs. There have been a number of questions about that. And I would stress, look, obviously tariffs are on all of our minds. And the discussion very much did include a focus on improving the dialogue around tariffs and on fixing the problems in the global trading system. The communique highlights that we are pleased to see that uncertainty has come down, but we clearly have more work to do. And I think there was a clear message in the communique that we are committed to continuing to reduce that uncertainty, and that includes around trade and tariffs. There was also, the IMF was at the meeting, and there was also quite a bit of discussion around unsustainable global imbalances, unfair trading practices in China, state-sponsored exports that are impacting our economies. The IMF, with the encouragement of the G7, agreed to do more work on identifying, not every imbalance is harmful. What are unsustainable global imbalances? What are domestic imbalances? And what policies will help reduce those and get the global trade system working better for everyone? Coming back to monetary policy, yes, as you indicated, monetary policy, obviously anything that's impacting the economy, that is something that monetary policy needs to look at carefully and consider. The impacts of a trade conflict, it weakens growth. It can also boost inflation. So, we have to carefully balance those. We are looking, we're looking at both sides of that. I think if, the more we can get uncertainty down, the more we can be more forward-looking as we move forward in our monetary policy decisions.
Hi, Mr. Champagne. Najira Amalise, The Globe and Mail.
Yeah, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you. The communique mentioned trade once. There was no mention of tariffs. So I'm hoping you can explain, what do you mean by getting back to basics? Is this not a retreat for the G7?
Well, I would say, we go back to the core mission. Our core mission is to provide stability and growth to the world economy. And that's why, and as the governor said, going back to the tariffs, there will always be questions and discussions around that, because if you want to restore stability and growth, the issue of tariffs obviously come to the forefront. And it is normal, for example, for me in Canada to advocate for Canada, for our businesses, for our worker, and for Canada. But that being said, there is a lot that we can achieve also together, and I think the governor explained it very well. There's a number of things that we can tackle that will generate that kind of growth and that kind of stability. So we all advocate for growth and stability. Look at the number of measures we can take. And if you look at the communique, it's very action-oriented. This was not meant to be a group discussion. We didn't come here to Banff and to Canada just to talk. This was really meant to shape the global agenda ahead of the Leaders' Summit that's going to happen. And like I said, I'm proud that there was a lot of questions about what the G7 could achieve following the Washington meeting and where we would be. And I think you see in the communique and the action taken around Ukraine, around financial crime, around productivity, around resiliency of the economy, around growth policies. I think it sends a very clear signal to the world, people who are watching at home, that the G7 is united in purpose and in action. And I think that's what people want to see, because the G7 is the forum in the world today that you can tackle global challenges. And our mission was to tackle those around growth and stability. And I would say the fact that you have a joint communique represent well the fact that we live up to the moment in time and in history that was presented to us. And that's why I say this is Canada's global leadership, as the Prime Minister has indicated. This is a great example of Canada shaping up the global agenda.
The U.S. House of Representatives passed a tax bill earlier this morning that proposes to substantially increase taxes on foreign companies whose parent companies are based in countries that impose taxes that the U.S. thinks are unfair, like the digital services tax. So this would presumably affect Canada. So I'm hoping to get your reaction to this and whether you think that is going to impact the Canada-U.S. relationship.
Well, first of all, as you would expect, Tiff and I have been very busy in the last 2 days, and particularly this morning, to bring everyone to a conclusion and common ground. So I have not had a chance to read the bill. I've seen some headlines, so I would want to take the time to review that, and so that we can provide you more feedback with respect to the Canadian position on that. But you would appreciate that our mission, Tiff and I, was really to conclude a successful G7 meeting so that Banff goes down in history like Fontainebleau was 50 years ago as a turning point where the world comes together to tackle global challenges.
Next question.
Sir, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Minister Champagne and Governor Macklem. Promit Mukherjee from Reuters. You officials told us that there was a proposal for a $50 price cap from the $60 for the Russian oil. Did you discuss these things, and was there a pushback from Mr. Bessent on that?
I will comment, and then Tiff may want to add. We discussed a number of things to further support Ukraine. I think everyone understands there's a moral imperative for us to stand shoulder to shoulder to Ukraine, because they're fighting for democracy for all of us, and Canada has been at the forefront of that. The fact that, the Minister of Finance of Ukraine was the only non-G7 minister invited to the meeting sends a very strong signal to the world to have the Minister of Finance of Ukraine stand shoulder to shoulder with the G7 minister is a very big statement. And the fact that you've seen in the communique that now not only we talked about it, but we have put in the communique that any entity who supported the Russian war machine will be excluded from benefiting from the reconstruction of Ukraine. I think also that is a very big, statement. It's coming out of what Secretary Bessent had indicated before, and now you have the full G7 behind that. I think this is a significant statement that we made there. We discussed about other measures that could be taken in order to put additional pressure on Russia, but as you would appreciate, it's wise to keep these discussions amongst ourselves, and when these additional measures that we're going to consider, if they have to be put into action, you will be one of the first to know. Do you want to add, Governor?
Okay. Second question. We now know that Mr. Trump will be actually coming for the leaders' meet next month. What are the proposals and the measures that you will be putting forth for the leaders meet so that you can the leaders meet in that they can actually achieve some kind of a concrete measure and some concrete deal?
Well, our job obviously was to inform the leaders when it comes to growth and stability of the financial sector and in the world economy. So I think we have done our job, and I think the leaders will be seized from the outcome in the communique that we have outlined. I think this is a real milestone. The governor and I could agree. You know, there were some of you who were questioning whether we would come out with a communique, and I think this is a milestone that I would think the leaders will take into account in their discussion to say the finance minister, the governor, the central bank governors have met for 2.5 days, have come out with a set of policies and actions that we want to further work on, and I'm sure that's going to inform the discussion of the leader. This was our role for the governor and I to provide that kind of global leadership, set the global agenda, and we met the moment. Obviously, then it's going to be for the leaders to take stock of what we have achieved here and decide to build on the commitments that have been made by the G7 finance minister and central bank governors.
Yeah, I would just add that, I think an important element was the discussions were frank, they were collegial, and they were productive across the board. And I think that sets the stage for a very productive leaders summit in Kananaskis. And as the minister just highlighted, we dug in on a number of issues that are central to all our economies. There was a real focus on growth. Across the G7, we all want to see faster productivity growth. Productivity growth solves a lot of problems. It's higher wages for people. It's a bigger tax base for the Minister of Finance. It's more growth without inflation for the Governor of the Bank of Canada. And it's more competitive businesses globally. So, I was very encouraged with the concerted focus on growth. In each of our countries, that may mean slightly different things, but when the G7 moves together in a coordinated way, that's going to help all of us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We will take one last question.
Hey there, Eric Hertzberg with Bloomberg News.
Yes, how are you doing, sir?
Good, and yourself?
Yeah, good. Good to see you.
Good to see you. What was the decision behind not naming China outright in terms of excessive imbalances? And can you offer more detail as to whether fees, tariffs, or limits on the flood of lower-value Chinese goods were discussed?
Sir, can you just repeat the second part of your question, because I could not hear you very well.
Sorry, yeah. Could you offer more detail as to whether fees, tariffs, or limits on the flood of lower-value Chinese goods were discussed at the meeting?
Right, I see what you're doing. So on the first thing, I think we were glad to have our discussion was informed by the work of the international organization around non-market practices. And I would say this was a very, very interesting discussion, very productive discussion, non-market practices, over capacity. But in many ways, in order to have a framework, in order to define what they are, to detect and be able to act together as a G7. So I think this is really a step forward in the G7 in order to address that, because that's not a new issue. I would say this is something that people have been talking about for some time. But now you have a blueprint for the G7, to be able to identify what they are, to be able to track what their impact, but also to be able to act. So this is one step forward in the right direction, and it goes to what the governor was saying. When you're talking about growth policies and the spillover that this overcapacity can have to our economy and how we're going to react, this is really a step forward. And when I say where you find common grounds, people have talked about tariffs, but definitely there will always be tension around tariffs, but there's also places where you find common ground and saying this is one of them. With respect to low-value shipment, this is something that we had looked at, and the impact that it posed to our respective jurisdiction. The very large increase, the issue around that could facilitate all sorts of things in terms of illicit drugs. We've seen a number of other activities that we want to make sure we coordinate our policy action around that. There's a big environmental footprint from these low packages. There's also challenges in terms of customs and duties around that. So the fact that the G7 has decided to really look into that more, I think is a good message, because also that, as you know, is very detrimental to domestic small retailers. And so therefore we want to look at that. Obviously, Canada is probably in a better place than many because, you know, our thresholds are already very low. We inspect pretty much all the packages that come into our country. So, but we want to see also a level of coordination, because you have to think about global logistics. We were mindful that if package these global logistics, to the extent we can align, have track, you know, mechanism in order to be able to detect those that could be problematic. I think this is a step forward for the world.
And for Mr. Macklem, Governor Macklem, pardon me, forecasters see Canada headed for 2 consecutive back-to-back quarters of either negative growth or flat growth, largely in part because of the U.S. tariffs. Is that threat of U.S. tariffs still the biggest risk to Canada's economy right now, or have you changed your mind after discussions here with Bessent?
Well, I am certainly encouraged by the discussions we had over the last 3 days, but there's a lot more work to do. And if you go back to our January monetary policy, or sorry, our April monetary policy report, faced with a great deal of uncertainty, we actually didn't publish a central scenario. We published 2 different scenarios. I mean, in terms of the outlook, we're going to get the first quarter next Friday, first quarter national accounts. I think we'll see how it shakes out. What we've seen in the data is it looks like a pretty big pull forward on exports. Exports are going to hold GDP growth up. You'll probably see some inventory accumulation. That'll hold it up. On the other hand, I think consumption is going to be weaker than it was in the previous quarter, and business investment in particular, I think, is probably going to be quite a bit weaker. Certainly, what we hear talking to businesses is they're really pausing their investment. They're waiting for more clarity on the way forward. What that means is you get to the second quarter. I expect the second quarter will be quite a bit weaker, just because the consequence of a pull forward means you're going to have less in the next quarter. You could see some inventory decumulation. So yes, I'm expecting a weak second quarter. Where we go from there, I think, really depends on what happens to tariffs. I know Canada is keen to sit down with the United States and work through our differences, come to an agreement. I think if we can get that clarity, we can get back to growth. Clearly, if things move in the other direction, yes, it'll be worse. Oui, d'accord. En termes de l'évolution de l'économie, le PIB pour le premier semestre, les exportations vont être forts. Ils étaient avancés pour éviter les tarifs, mais je pense que la consommation sera plus faible que c'était, et surtout l'investissement probablement très faible au premier trimestre. Qu'est-ce qu'on entend de toutes les entreprises qui sont en pause en termes de décision des investissements? Pour le deuxième trimestre, probablement, dans le premier trimestre, probablement entre 1 et 2 %. Donc, mais le problème, c'est qu'en avancer les exportations, ça veut dire que le deuxième trimestre, ça sera plus faible. Et après ça, vraiment, on verra. Ça va dépendre beaucoup qu'est-ce qui se passe. Et je sais que le Canada veut engager avec les États-Unis pour avoir un nouveau engagement en termes d'échange. Et je pense que s'il y a plus de clarité, moins d'incertitude, on peut retourner de la croissance. Sinon, oui, l'économie va être faible.
On va prendre une dernière question.
Allez-y, madame.
Une Une relance, parfait. Bien, d'abord, je vais faire du chemin sur ce qui vient d'être évoqué sur la question des tarifs. Vous dites que vos discussions avec les États-Unis se sont bien passées, que vous vous entendez bien. À quel point êtes-vous rassuré par ce qui s'est dit dans ces rencontres pour penser que peut-être le Canada ne fera pas l'objet de nouvelles vagues de tarifs de la part des États-Unis?
Écoutez, moi, je ne ferai pas de prédiction sur l'avenir. Ce que je vous reflète, c'est exactement la discussion que j'ai eue avec le secrétaire du Trésor. On a une bonne collaboration. Vous savez, ça, c'était aussi, il faut mettre ça un peu dans le cadre. Ça, c'était une discussion du G7. Donc, évidemment, comme président du G7, comme coprésident du G7, notre rôle, c'est évidemment de faire avancer l'agenda du G7. C'est normal que, comme ministre canadien, évidemment, on fait avancer aussi les intérêts du Canada. Mais le fait qu'on puisse se parler, le fait qu'on puisse échanger de façon très directe, de façon très productive, le fait que à chaque fois que j'ai l'occasion de rappeler à nos voisins américains l'importance du Canada dans l'économie intégrée nord-américaine, moi, je pense que c'est une bonne chose. Vous comprenez que mon rôle, c'est évidemment de défendre les intérêts canadiens, les travailleurs canadiens, l'industrie canadienne, mais aussi, en même temps, dans ce rôle-là du G7, moi, je pense qu'on a réussi, avec le gouverneur de la Banque du Canada, à vraiment mettre un agenda de l'avant qui va nous permettre de réduire l'instabilité et de favoriser la croissance. C'était vraiment l'objectif qu'on s'était donné. Et vous savez, quand vous commencez ces discussions-là, bien, vous arrivez avec une mission, avec des idées, avec une vision. Mais ce qui en ressort aujourd'hui, ce qui fait que le Canada, moi, je pense, a eu du succès, c'est qu'on en ressort qu'on est plus unis. On est plus unis que jamais. Alors, c'est un bon message, je pense, pour les gens qui nous regardent parce que, évidemment, ce qui se passe au G7, ça a une influence à l'échelle mondiale. Et je pense que notre réunion à nous, des ministres des Finances, des gouverneurs des banques centrales, c'est un bon précurseur aussi au sommet des leaders qui aura lieu dans quelques semaines. Alors, moi, je pense qu'en sortant unis ici avec un message clair, un message fort, un message ambitieux, bien, je pense que ça crée ce momentum-là pour la suite des choses au sein du G7 pour lequel le Canada a l'honneur de présider cette année.
Je vais terminer sur...
Moi, je vais juste souligner que j'étais encouragé par l'atmosphère. Comme le ministre a mentionné, le secrétaire du Trésor, il était ici pour toutes les 3 journées. Il était très engagé, il a beaucoup participé et l'atmosphère était collégiale et c'était productif. Donc, mais il y a encore du travail à faire. Donc, c'est une bonne étape, mais il y a encore du travail à faire.
Je vais juste terminer sur
oui.
l'Ukraine, si vous me permettez.
Oui.
Je ne me suis pas présentée à l'anniversaire de Radio-Canada, pardon.
Ça fait plaisir.
Donc, sur l'Ukraine, c'est quand même assez flagrant de ne pas avoir mis la notion d'illégal dans ce communiqué, ni en anglais, ni en français. C'est pourtant ce que vous avez dit en tout premier dans votre déclaration aujourd'hui. Pourquoi avoir fait ce choix de ne pas mettre ce mot? Est-ce que c'était une question de ne pas froisser certaines personnes autour de la table?
Moi, je vous dirais, je pense que vous lisez trop dans cette addition-là ou non. Vous savez, tout le monde est clair que la position des pays du G7, elle est unanime sur cet enjeu-là. Vous savez, moi, j'ai fait une déclaration, il y a plusieurs commentaires. C'est moi qui a même reçu le ministre des Finances, Marchenko, lorsqu'il est arrivé au Canada. On a passé une journée ensemble. On a eu une très bonne discussion avec les collègues. Je ne pense pas qu'il faut lire dans le fait que dans une déclaration ou dans l'autre, il peut y avoir un mot qui a été ajouté ou non. Moi, je pense que le message qui ressort de ce G7-là de façon très claire, c'est cette unité-là, qu'on travaille ensemble, épaule à épaule pour appuyer l'Ukraine, qu'on veut participer dans la reconstruction. Le Canada a un rôle dans la reconstruction de l'Ukraine. Et en même temps, je pense que le paragraphe qui devrait attirer le plus votre attention, c'est celui où on a repris un peu cette idée-là, qui avait été avancée par le secrétaire du Trésor américain, Bessent, en disant sur les entités qui auraient pu appuyer de façon directe ou indirecte la machine de guerre russe ne pourront pas participer à la reconstruction. Moi, je pense que si vous cherchez un élément fondamental, un pilier de cette déclaration-là du G7, bien, vous l'avez devant vous parce que de mettre ça dans le texte, c'était vraiment un élément clé du soutien des différents pays, évidemment, au G7 à l'Ukraine. Alors, je pense que c'est là que vous allez voir, c'est vraiment là où je pense que le cœur de notre engagement collectif, vous allez le trouver dans ce paragraphe-là. And just as I finish, because there's no, I just want to take a minute to thank, obviously, the governor, the Bank of Canada, all the folks, but also the First Nations. The First Nations here who have welcomed us in this beautiful town, in this beautiful landscape. I want to thank also all the folks here in Alberta, in particular in Banff, who have been great hosts. I can tell you, I have done a few G7 in my life. I've done a few G20, but the delegates are leaving here more inspired than ever. I left today with 3 words. I said, let's seize the moment, let's be ambitious, and let's, let the world see our unity in purpose and action. And I think everyone is leaving Banff, everyone is leaving Canada inspired by the work that we have achieved here. And I think we did a great favor to the world by shaping a global agenda that will deliver for people around the world. So in that, I just want to say thank you for our hosts and the First Nations who have been with us here in Banff in Alberta. Merci tout le monde.
Merci.
Merci.